Okay, so uh, good good evening. Obviously we've had some rather big news sports-wise in the last couple of days. Obviously, the battle for the Premier League is going to go down to the wire. We know that. Obviously, we've had Watford and Norwich both relegated from the Premier League, so it's now up to a battle between three sides to avoid the drop. And of course, Major League Baseball announcing they are going to be returning to London from 2023 in for three more London series in 23, 2024, and 2026. They haven't announced what venues and what dates and what teams will be participating, and more will follow in due course. That's a really interesting one from Major League Baseball because the local government in London were hoping that they would come again this year, and obviously they never got to fulfil the second year of their initial contract back in 2020. So Major League Baseball deciding to renew their London series. It'll be interesting to see again, as I say, what teams they get to participate, what venues they use, and what dates they choose. So there's a lot riding on this Major League Baseball London series. It's it, so we'll see what happens in regards to um, the Major League Baseball London series and whether they continue past 2026. I am surprised um, they're not coming in 2025. Really interesting that they are um, that they are not committing to 2025. Um, so we'll see what happens with the London series of Major League Baseball. Brendan McCullum is set to be named England's new cricket test coach. He's agreed to take the role and subject to a contract being finalised. He's currently the coach in the IPL, the Kolkata Knight Riders. So we'll see what happens with Brendan McCullum. I'm not sold on a coach who's solely been in T20. Um, good attacking batsman though. That he was, and a very aggressive player. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Um, uh, Eric Haaland, obviously close to uh, um, moving around City. Champions League final, UEFA ticket distribution works as Alexander Serafin, the UEFA president. Distribution and pricing of Champions League final tickets is the system that works as it aids clubs. Half the 75,000 tickets for the game against Real Madrid in Paris are given to sponsors and officials. Um, uh, so there's been criticism of the fact that half the Champions League final tickets don't go to the two clubs. Mm, Erling Haaland, yeah, the Erling Haaland. Going to be interesting. Let's have a look. Obviously, yeah. So the Erling Haaland potential sale to Man City is a lot less than what was anticipated, um, and it's got to be confirmed. So we'll see what happens with Haaland and whether that ends up getting confirmed. Obviously, his father Alvinga Haaland played for Manchester City as well, so that is a really interesting subplot to it all. Um, but Again, there's been a lot of criticism of Manchester City in regards to that basically completed transfer. Um, we'll see what happens there. As I say, UEFA have heavily criticised for the amount of tickets of the Champions League final. Over half the tickets don't go to the two clubs, Real Madrid and Liverpool. They go to corporates. That's gone down very very badly again, and UEFA's heavily criticised. They're defending their decision to uh, how they distribute the tickets, and they say the system is fair in regards to ticket distribution and the money of ticket sales going to the clubs. But at the same time, half the tickets available are not going directly to fan bases, and some of the prices of tickets again get criticised. Now, that UEFA regularly gets criticised for its ticket allocations, how it allocates finals. We saw back in 2019 the criticism that UEFA faced for having the Europa League final in Baku, and again the prices of tickets on the night and in both Champions League and Europa League finals a couple of years ago. Um, it's a difficult balancing act to strike as an organizer, but we'll see what happens. Um, the Major League Baseball though announcement is very very interesting. It's a big political thing as well, especially if London City Stadium is used as a venue, because when the playing surface is reconfigured for a Major League Baseball event, the taxpayer pays towards that reconfiguration because it is still technically a publicly owned stadium. And when I did my review of the 2019 head-to-head series between the Yankees and the Red Sox, there was a fair bit of criticism aimed at the product and the ticket price, the media deal that was struck between broadcasters. But what wasn't picked up at the time, and I think should have been, was the fact that uh, it was around £4 to £5 million worth of taxpayers' money was used in the stadium playing surface reconfiguration to bring it up to Major League Baseball configuration so that the games could be played. And um, in their preparing for the games and trying to find a venue, the Oval was the preferred venue that Major League Baseball wanted to use for the Island Series. The issue that Major League Baseball found was the Cricket World Cup was in full swing, and had they come a year earlier, they could have used the Oval. Because they came in 2019 rather than 2018 and 2017 when initially planned. The Cricket World Cup organisers were using the Oval as one of the host venues, and therefore the only stadium that could be used at the time was the London City Stadium, and that led obviously to costs being incurred by the British taxpayer. So that's something that Major League Baseball must be mindful of. Is the potential for negative headlines in that case, and a potential if the London series isn't a success, that it actually becomes a bit of a expensive failure and a costly marketing failure, and how its public image is perceived. Now, um, well, they have yet to announce the teams and dates for matches. We'll see what happens. But Major League Baseball is coming out of a very tricky situation with its lockout. Um, it will be interesting to see how Major League Baseball fans in the US feel about games being taken overseas to non-traditional locations by the league. Um, Same with like the NFL. It is always interesting getting an American fan's point of view when regular season games are taken overseas, such as the London series with the NFL. So I am wearing a 49ers jersey. That create it's something that I don't think we as European fans, you know, fully grasp, in the sense that when the NFL, and in this case Major League Baseball, take games overseas, what do domestic fans in the US and to a certain extent Canada, how they feel about their product and their league taking games overseas. When La Liga tried to take regular season matches overseas, the reaction was very, very negative. A lot of protests, players threatened to go on strike, and the plans were eventually shelved. So it is interesting to get an American fan's point of view in regards to when a North American major league decides to take their product in the regular season overseas, and how fans feel about that, what the reaction is. It is very, very interesting. Major League Baseball obviously is the last major league to dip its toe in the water and take uh, regular season games to Europe. Um, it's going to be interesting how this pans out long term and how much investment Major League Baseball puts into its London series, and how successful their product is. They're coming in 2023 and 2024 and 2026. They're not coming in 2025, which I find interesting. So they are taking a break. But it's going to be interesting to see um, long term Major League Baseball's commitment to the London series. Now, we look at what the NFL has done since 2007. There has been a significant financial investment. They have put a lot of energy and time into the London series. They have signed contracts with stadiums, agreements, and they continue to sign contract extensions with both Wembley and now White Hart Lane to continue to bring games here, a minimum number of games per season. They're now branching out into Germany as well, into the Allianz Arena in Munich. So the London series in the NFL sense has now spawned into an international series in the UK and Germany, and even into Mexico. So it's now part of the CBA negotiations going forward, and that becomes interesting. So Major League Baseball, they have an opportunity to grow their product. Will it solely be London that they're focusing on Europe? Will they decide to branch into other European locations as well? The NHL takes games all over Europe. It doesn't settle on one particular city or one particular location. It's been to Scandinavia, it's been to Finland, it's been to Sweden, it's been to the Czech Republic, it's been to Switzerland, it's been to the UK. You know, the NHL is a pan-European mindset. The NBA has taken games to the O2, formerly the Millennium Dome in London, for a significant period of time. It's been taking games to Europe now since the early 90s. So it is very, very surprising that Major League Baseball is where it is in regards to being the last of the major leagues to take games to Europe. Um, and it's going to be interesting to see, how much investment they put into their European series and how committed they are to their overseas series, like the NFL has basically committed to London for eternity. Um, but it is interesting to get an American fan view on taking games, regular season games, out of the US and Canada and into, let's say, London, for this example, or Munich, and how American fans feel about taking their leagues overseas. And the debate's been now had in Australia as well with the NRL, with the rugby league, and possibly taking games to the US and growing the product and growing the sport. Other major sporting events coming up, we've got the Commonwealth Games, we've got the Women's UEFA Euros taking place as well next month. We've got the Rugby League World Cup in the autumn, and of course we've got the Qatar World Cup over the Christmas period. So there's still some major international sporting events to take place. Some of them have been heavily criticised. The Rugby League World Cup, the organisers obviously delaying by a year with all the statements that came out in 2020 and early 2021 saying that delaying by a year was the least favourable option they had on the table. They've done that. In hindsight, it was the correct decision. The way the cancellation was handled last year was poor, and that falls with all parties, including the Australian and New Zealand national sides and their setups, and the way they handled it, and the way they communicated their decision. It wasn't well handled. But at the time, it seemed like a bit of a hasty decision. Yeah, obviously, with hindsight, it was the correct decision. But the way it was handled wasn't great. It's led to a little bit of mistrust, I feel, and it was a bad PR exercise by all concerned. Um, and much can be learned from the mistakes made uh, during during that process towards the end of last year in September time, September and October. But hopefully, tournament takes place without any problems this year. They've had to rearrange some of the dates, some of the stadiums that are going to be used to avoid problems clashing with the Qatar World Cup. Preview video is up and ready to be dissected. We've got some debutants in the Rugby League World Cup in Greece and Jamaica. Um, so hopefully it's a good tournament. The Rugby League, especially in Europe, needs a good tournament. Um, the TV deals in place though leave a lot to be desired, especially for a global audience. I think the media partnerships not the best. I think that's a failing on the organisers' part. I think they could have done better trying to sell the game to the US and Canada and market the game to new locations. But if the tournament is well works out okay, then maybe it can grow itself. But so the Rugby League World Cup is crucial. Is there a risk that some teams will be a low standard? There's always a risk when you have international competition and you are expanding an international competition as well, where you do have debutant nations and you do have an enlarged competition from previous tournaments that in the short term some of the nations that qualify aren't as good. But in the long term, what you want is the long term growth of a sport. So with Qatar, for example, and this is where a lot of they want to expand the World Cup. A lot of people want to see more African nations, but if you watch the African Cup of Nations at the end of last year, beginning of this year, the quality was absolutely appalling. The expanded Euros, I felt, was a decent tournament, although the format of the actual tournament itself, with some of the best third place teams getting through to the next round, some not, leaves a little bit to be desired. Um, but with an expanded World Cup, you are going to get teams that in previous years wouldn't have qualify. And in the short term, yes, you could argue with a fair degree of reasoning that the quality level will not be as high as it should be. But there is a risk that I personally don't think that Jamaica and Greece are going to be terrible. Most of the Jamaicans are second or third generation British, and most of the Greeks are second or third generation Australian, and they do play in the Super League and NRL systems. So in that regard, I'm not overly concerned about the quality. It's just about how competitive the Greek and the Jamaicans are going to be, and whether they can actually put up a decent performance for their standard that they play. My thoughts on Seraphine's comments regarding the Euros last year. I haven't seen them. I haven't seen his comments. I've seen the statements released about the ticket availability for the Champions League final and how it apparently is a fair system, when in reality it only really suits UEFA and the club owners, not the fans, in regards to ticket availability. And half the tickets for the Champions League final go to corporates. Who knew? So I haven't seen his comments regarding the Euros last year. What I do know is UEFA will never do a pan-European tournament ever again. As soon as Seraphim was put in his position, one of the first things he did state was, "We're never doing this again," because it was a Platini idea anyway. Um, the the Euros itself was not a bad tournament. I will say that it was not a bad tournament for quality standard and entertainment standard. Um, I will I will state that on. Let's have a look what his comments were. I haven't seen any comments that he has made. Although uh, he has. Oh, it's to do with the disorder at the end of last season. He said it must never happen again. It's unacceptable. Um, well, unfortunately, the security. Oh yeah, it's going to happen again. Whether it's English fans, German fans, Italians, Spanish, um, it's going to happen again. But I think that the failure there, and this is something that I think um, is not just an English problem or a British problem. The failure there is on security on the cheap. Um, that's what happens when you do security on the cheap. And whether it's here in England or in Europe, when you do security on the cheap, things like that happen. I think the media has a part to play as well and a responsibility um, um, in regards to you know over encouraging ticketless fans to turn up. Um, the German hooligans are like any other hooligans; they've been doing it for years. However, the way the media reports acts of disorder is it when the British fans do it, we are vile, reprehensible. When Italian or German or Spanish ultras do it, or other ultras, it's not really newsworthy until it's someone like Eastern European, like the Poles or the Russians or the Ukrainians. And I remember in 2012, the Polish and the Ukrainian thugs were were pretty vile. As I say, we'll see what happens in Qatar. We'll see what the German and the Dutch hooligans are quite well known across Europe for their organisation and their violent tactics. Well, I remember the 2006 World Cup. It was Polish and German hooligans in the 16-hour battle of Dortmund. I seem to remember, and I used to live near Dortmund. Um, and it was sparked by German hooligans attacking two Tunisian fans. Um, the thing is, Dutch and French hooligans are just as bad and just as militantly violent. Um, in regards to the mess at Wembley, that's what happens when you do security on the cheap, and that's what happens when you have a pan European tournament. Um, you 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 have a Serafin is going to do what and state what UEFA are going to state. Um, in regards, every major tournament we have seen, there's been disorder of some kind or other. The way the press reports said disorder and the way UEFA sanctions said disorder seems to vary from country to country and FA to FA. Oh look, I like the way you're having a go at the Germans. Trust me, you haven't seen what the Dutch are capable of yet, or the French. The Italians are pretty brutal. Eh, the the hooligan element. Oh look, Seraphin is in a difficult position. A difficult position because they had a pan-European tournament. Out of that tournament, Hungary were fined, Scotland were fined. I think we were fined for disorder. I think um, I think every nation actually has some fines. I remember in 2016 there was the Croatian FA were heavily fined for disorder that their so-called fans exhibited in France. The Russians were heavily fined. They always threaten to throw nations out, and the fines are pitiful against FAs. The fines that they dish out are pitiful. Um, the situation is whether it's England fans misbehaving or Scottish fans, German, Dutch, French, Italian. It doesn't matter when the hooligan element misbehaves. Uh, it's how the press report it, and each country's domestic TV stations and national newspapers will report things differently. Um, well, look, we'll see what happens. We were the host location. The majority of the troublemakers were English and were ticketless and were under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Um, Again, the build up to the semi final and the final, the media whipped up this sort of unnecessary sense of I don't know what. Um, the media companies and the social media companies have a responsibility on how they promote and report things and how they, as I say, promote things. In regard to Hungary have had multiple sanctions against them over many years. That isn't isolated with Hungary. That's an ongoing issue. Um, in regards to the situation at Wembley in a nutshell, as a singular event, that's what happens when you do security on the cheap. That's when you come. Who is it? What's up? Oh right. Oh shit. I wasn't expecting that. I'm just putting that to simple. Oh, pardon me. Well, cheers. Ah. Oh, neighbour upstairs giving me some vinyl there. The Wembley's been heavily criticised as a stadium since it was reopened in 2007. The old Wembley was a crumbling relic and needed desperately at the time. It did need a refurb, reconfiguration, whatever you want to look at it. The old Wembley did desperately need investment. The stadium that we have, great, they built a hideous concrete monolith in place of a crumbling concrete monolith. The issue is they've not changed the infrastructure and the approaches on the outside. And what's happened is the area of Wembley in London has built up around the football stadium and Wembley Way. They did nothing to upgrade and modernise and improve the infrastructure connectivity to the stadium in that part of London. So the and the amount of people who complain about Wembley, it's a transport bottleneck getting to. I mean, I do feel sorry for the locals in the Wembley area who have to deal with it when matches are on. Um, it is not. I wouldn't have thought the most pleasant experience. Um, and there's been a lot of criticism aimed at the stadium since it was reopened in 2007. So, I mean, look, I mean, we could debate the pros and cons of Wembley till the sun goes down. But the issues with Wembley on the Euro final last year was doing security on the cheap. That is the best way I can describe the issues. They were doing policing and security on the cheap. They did not get the numbers right and the resources right for that game. What 13, 14 months ago, they got the security resourcing all wrong. As soon as they worked out, they should have worked out as soon as England were in the final. They should have drafted in extra reinforcements, mostly on a policing standpoint. Um, but I wouldn't say it's the necessarily the worst place because of it's in the major built up area. It's the infrastructure and the transport links are a nightmare for Wembley, and the stadium itself is crap. But the FA are still desperately trying to fully pay off all the interest on that stadium rebuild. Um, Wembley, much like the London City Stadium, much like a lot of stadium rebuilds, has been a bit of a political hot potato, especially when taxpayer money has been used to fund a rebuild or a redevelopment of a facility. Um, Wembley's been in the news for a variety of reasons since before they demolished the old one. Um, it's not like you can create an exclusion zone blocking off fans in the area who don't have a ticket. Well, every stadium has this issue. Um, the issue with Wembley is it's not necessarily creating a fan zone or a ticketing exclusion zone. The issue with things like Wembley, in fact, any stadium, is infrastructure links to and from and location. Um, and I think the bigger issue with Wembley is the fact that the FA tried to sell it on the cheap 4 years ago for below market value when taxpayer money, our taxpayer money, went into the redevelopment of the stadium. Um, the Wembley rebuild I think it was over a 6 year period as well. It wasn't a quick redevelopment of the site. Has met with a lot of criticism in the years following its reopening, and there's been a lot of debate about the Wembley stadium redevelopment and how much over budget it went, the taxpayer money involved in that redevelopment, a whole host of things. The London City Stadium, the current London Mayor Sadiq Khan wants to renegotiate the rental contract with West Ham United. Now, that's a legally binding contract. West Ham are laughing all the way to the bank with how little they have to pay to lease that stadium. It's very, very, very beneficial contract for West Ham. Um, the funny thing is, when Major League Baseball went to the London City Stadium 2019, we the taxpayer had to pay. I think it was approximated at around £4 to £5 million for the playing surface reconfiguration to bring it up to Major League Baseball standards to play on. Um, and then the Olympic legacy becomes a bit of a political discussion point and a hot potato. But no, Wembley has been a an ongoing discussion point even before the rebuild and the demolition of the old Wembley happened. What happened to the two towers at Wembley? They were meant to have ended up at Exeter City's football club, and they didn't. They were meant to be preserved, and they weren't. Um, the the Wembley Arch that we see today, the fact you can actually see Wembley Stadium from um, from the Shard and all these other things. Um, the, the London Stadium is decent, but I mean, look, in regards to Wembley Stadium, I mean, it's not being used for the Rugby League World Cup at the end of the year. That's going to be the Emirates. Is going to be the stadium in London that's used to host matches, which I find very, very interesting. I really do. I really do find that interesting that Wembley is not being used for the Rugby League World Cup like it was in 2013. That is very, very, very striking that since we last hosted the World Cup, we're not using the national stadium. Now, Wembley Stadium has come under criticism, and so have the RFL for their agreement until 2027, the Challenge Cup final. That's one of the longest signed agreements that exists in professional sports in the modern era. That would mean that the agreement has been going for 20 years. Um, Now, the RFL has not hinted that it's going to change course where it hosts the Challenge Cup final. Um, but there's been growing pressure to move the Challenge Cup final from Wembley to major sports grounds around the country after 2027. No, it wasn't Sadiq Khan who was mayor at the time. It was still Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson gifted the stadium to West Ham. Sadiq Khan came after, and one of the first things he complained about as mayor was the deal that had been signed by his predecessor. It's a legally binding contract. There's not a lot the London Mayor's Office can do in regards. There are other issues with the London City Stadium. I think you'll find it's not just the value and length of the contract that West Ham and some basically the London Authority have agreed. There are other issues at play with that stadium. There are other issues at play with that stadium. Um, it's going to make money for London. Just it's going to make less money than what the current mayor would like. Um, but then it raises the debate about you know teams owning their facilities or leasing their facilities and how you can end up with an issue where a football team or a rugby team doesn't own their facility. And the best example we can currently give is Derby County with Pride Park. We could have had Coventry City, which was with what was the Rico, which is now the Coventry City Building Society Stadium. Um, but yes, I mean, sporting facilities, who owns them? And when we look at professional teams, we've seen this with so many sports where a team, a professional team, doesn't technically own their stadium. Um, no, the Challenge Cup is not being hosted by the Tottenham. It is being hosted by Wembley until 2027. So if and the debate is whether the Challenge Cup should stay in London, the final. Um, um, After 2027, the RFL is facing increasing pressure to take the final to places like Old Trafford, Huddersfield, James's Park in Newcastle, a stadium further north. Um, uh, the white elephant, the Athens one is a white elephant because it basically bankrupted the city council and the national government put so much money into the Athens games. The facilities weren't even ready on the opening ceremony. The day the games opened, they were still finishing building stuff. Montreal, only part of the Montreal Olympic site is being used still. The F1, for example, and the Montreal Olympics, the build up to the Montreal Olympics was bedeviled and dogged by trade union disputes, strikes, um, and the fear that they wouldn't get any of the facilities done on time. There was major labour unrest in Canada in the 70s at the time, leading into the Olympics. There was major concerns that they wouldn't even get um, the facilities ready on time. I will say this though, I wouldn't say it's a true white elephant waste of Canadian taxpayer money because they are still using some of the facilities. I think actually now the Olympic Park is a national park in Canada and they have an F1 circuit. And there is a fair bit of use that some of the facilities in Montreal are still being used, but the political fallout from that was quite damaging for the government today. The copper box is still getting used, yes. You could argue a lot of the facilities that were put in place for the London 2012 Olympics are still getting good use out of them. And if they're not being used by sport, they've been turned over to local people, local communities for housing projects and redevelopment projects. So yes, you could argue that the Olympic legacy has been more successful in that regard. But then if you talk about Olympic legacy, you got to talk about sports funding, and you have to talk about accessibility, grassroots facilities, that kind of thing. At which point, that becomes a more complex issue. Um, we have seen a lot of Olympic sports, and we'll use the term Olympic sports, have their funding drastically cut. We've seen debates about the culture within sports programs for the Olympics. In regards to the win at all cost mentality, how money was spent, complaints against coaches, complaints against the governing bodies. So we have to be a little bit careful with um, talking about the Olympic legacy because not all of the Olympic legacy post 2012 is good. There are a lot of grey areas and negative stories that have come out following the 2012 Olympics, and some of the um, methods used for that legacy. I didn't watch the Miami GP, but I read it was shite. I still believe F1 will be hanging on in 5 years' time, and then wait, wanting to put racing in the US and tracks. Um, uh, I look. I can understand. Well, I don't watch F1 anymore. There are plenty of good tracks in the US and Canada that aren't street circuits. I mean, Watkins Glen, Road America, Laguna Seca are just a handful that I can think of off the top of my head. Um, so that um, you could argue that, that those facilities already have a good basis in place, and you would need a certain amount of investment to bring them up to F1 FIA standard. But the core facilities are there. Um, but Liberty Media is American. They've now got the operating rights. They're the ones who have changed, brought in the sprint qualifying races, which I don't like that for. I don't. Look, I've completely tuned off F1 completely, and I think you can partly blame Bernie Ecclestone for that. Um, what's the biggest white elephant in modern Olympic history? Let's say from the 80s onwards. You could argue Athens 2004, Rio in 2016. Um, Pyeongchang 2018. There's been quite a few. Been quite a few. Well, we say white elephants or failures. Athens is the one that's basically bankrupted the country. Rio, the facilities are falling apart, and the South Korea Winter Olympics 2018. A lot of those facilities won't get used either long term. So um, there's your answer to that. Well, I think there's about 3 or 4 Olympics you can look at and go, okay, Sarajevo in '84. That's all that legacy has been undone by conflict. Um, but I would say Athens 2004 is and Rio 2016 are the worst for wastage. We know a lot of corruption scandals have come out of that. Governments have fallen because of it. Um, I haven't looked at sports funding with winners and losers. I haven't looked at all. Um, sports funding is always a very tricky issue because someone has to lose out, someone has to win. Um, and with what we've seen come out since 2012 about the cultures within certain sporting organisations that make up the British Olympic programme, there are some sports that are really under the spotlight for their culture um, within. Basketball, I don't understand the point behind British basketball. No offence. Um, we've never had a history in the sport. Um, UK government sports funding. Well, the Olympic program. I mean, we didn't have the. They set a Prime Minister and Culture Secretary have announced the government will provide 232 million for the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Let's see where it goes. Well, that was last August actually. Oh, it's interesting. So that a lot of this has changed. Um, waste of time. Current funding figures UK sport. Here we go. Shit. So archery got 1.1 million for Tokyo. Athletics got 23 million for Tokyo. Badminton got less than a million, and we're quite good at badminton. That is ridiculous. Boxing got over 12 million. Canoeing got 16.3. Cycling gets 24.5, but we actually have pro cycling teams and sponsors, so they can actually fund a lot of that themselves. Diving gets 7.2. Equestrian gets 12.5. Gymnastics got 13.4. Field hockey got 12.9, so basically 13 million. Judo got 6.5. Karate, 600,000, 630,000. Modern pentathlon got 5.5 mil. Rowing got 24.5 million. Sailing got 22.2. Shooting got 6. Sport climbing got under 700,000. Swimming got 18.7. Taekwondo got 8.2, and triathlon got 7 million. Then we've got Paralympic funding, and that gets weird because there's all these different totals added together. And you got the Winter Olympic funding. Biathlon got just £6,000. Bobsleigh got 120,000. Curling got 5.2 million. Figure skating got 40,000. Luge got 6,000. And then we've got all the various speed skating, skiing, snowboard, skeleton bob, short track, skating, etc., etc. So basketball always claims they should get more because poor black kids like it. They also like association football as well in larger numbers in this country. What happens to sports like basketball, skateboarding in the next Olympics? I couldn't care less. Quite frankly, I've tuned out of the Olympics. With what we now know about the funding formulas, and I was looking at just there at the last Olympic Games, Tokyo and Beijing. Some of the sports got a pitiful amount of money. What do you think about the ECB dodging Gary Kirsten again and opting for Brendan McCullum instead? Rob Key should be sacked when this coach hits up. Well, we can tell that you don't like the ECB. Look, there's a reason why Gary Kirsten isn't getting offered the job. Either he interviews really, really badly, or he's not the right fit for what the ECB want. How the hell did baseball get into Tokyo 21? Because they play it. No, baseball is a very, very popular sport in Japan. One of the more popular sports in Japan. The Japanese league at a professional level is well funded and well supported. And the best Japanese players play in Major League Baseball. So in that regard, look, you're talking about cricket and the ECB. Nothing makes sense with them. Just because you want the guy to get it doesn't mean the ECB are going to agree with you. He's applied for the job how many times? Have been rejected how many times? And Brendan McCullum is a Kiwi, so I don't know how that's jobs for the boys. He's not long retired, and he's been coaching in the IPL, so I don't know how that's jobs for the boys. That statement is, yay, Owen Morgan, great. So an Irishman's coached by a Kiwi. Look, when it goes wrong, but it's the ECB, so it's not going to go right now, is it? It doesn't matter if it's the ECB. They love throwing money down the toilet and then asking the government to keep bailing them out. I wouldn't say that's jobs for the boys because McCullum is a Kiwi. The fact that they've decided to separate the two coaching roles, they should have stayed separate from the beginning. I think merging the two roles together was a mistake. Again, the ECB, the ECB needs massive structural overhaul. Best way I can describe that. They're obsessed with the 100 format, which no one wants apart from the ECB. But just let me go with it. We'll see what happens. The fact that they named the captain before they named the coach, I think, is a head scratcher for me. That's not the way to try and solve the problems that is being faced. Oh dear. Um, Now that the ECB has dug themselves a hole over the last, what, 14, 15, 16, well, how many, 17 years, it's not easy to fix the problems. Um, the IIHF soon. Great Britain will stay on the top flight for a fifth consecutive year, and I bet the government still won't tilt their head. No, because we don't qualify for the Olympics. If the national side qualified for an upcoming Winter Olympics, then they have to take note of what the national side is doing. We missed out on Olympic qualification for Beijing. Um, if we were to qualify for Olympic Games, that's when you start getting funding for the sport. That's how it works. Oh, that's going to explode. If that explodes, I'm going to be pissed. Yay. It, the thing is, the 100, I couldn't give a toss about the format. The fact the ECB is admitting it's going to make a loss and won't break even. And that's before all this COVID and cost of living crisis. Yet this is the same organisation that comes up with this idea to try and save cricket domestically because of the TV deal they've signed with Sky since 2005, which has actually damaged their brand rather than helped it. First up, um, the ECB then during COVID went to the government asking for an emergency loan. This came at a time after they've already announced that the 100 in its first year was going to make a loss, and best estimates in its second year was break even at best. So the 100 format is not making the ECB any money. They've already been under fire for their advertising for it, their sponsorship with KP, which is a fast food manufacturer. Um, Fans have already gone, well, this is shit. Um, this is an organisation that has admitted that the format is not making any money, yet had to ask the government for emergency funding when they've set up a product that doesn't make any money. The only winter sport the government bothering is curling because we're already good at it, so I can see ice hockey getting a boost in funding on this. No, if we qualify for the Olympics, then the sport gets a boost in government funding because it is a professional sport in this country, like rugby union, rugby league, and football. Um, it doesn't help with its funding prospects because you've got a professional team sport at the elite level in this country where the players get paid to play. Um, and we haven't qualified for the Olympics for quite some time. If we were to qualify for the Olympics, that then changes the debate. The problem is that the mainstream media aren't interested either, and that's the BBC. The BBC, Sky, they have no interest in picking up the TV rights, and if until the mainstream media has an interest in reporting and broadcasting, I wouldn't say it was a mistake to sack Bielsa. I think the issue with Leeds was they've had a lot of injuries this season, a lot of injuries, and their squad depth was tested. But then there were question marks over Bielsa's training techniques. I wouldn't say it was all for nothing. We'll see what happens. I mean, Everton aren't out of the woods yet. Burnley aren't out of the woods yet. All three of these clubs have sacked their manager this season. Everton have had three managers in 12 months. Uh, there were question marks, however, of Leeds' training techniques under Bielsa and the amount of injuries under Bielsa at all teams he's ever coached. Um, and his replacement has been highly critical of the techniques used in training. That has led to a spike in injuries with players who otherwise haven't had those type of injuries before. Um, we have the same debate in every single sport about certain coaches under their coaching style. Injuries go up. Eddie Jones with the England rugby team, for example, Bielsa in football. Uh, while they had a very attractive style of play, they weren't very good defensively, and the idea is to keep the ball out of your own net, and their goal difference is shocking. If Leeds go down, Leeds go down. If Everton go down, Everton go down. If Burnley go down, Burnley go down. I think it will go down to the wire. It will go down to the last couple of games of the season. It will also go down to see who's got the most fit players at the end of it, because Leeds have a problem of too many of their players basically not being fit um, all at the same time. There's been a lot of injuries uh, at, at the same time. I don't see how his training methods would work in international as much as I would love to see him coach a lot. He has been an international coach. I think he has coached Argentina. Um, he has coached internationally. Um, again, some coaches are more suited to the club game. Other coaches are suited to the international game. Um, they are different styles of play. I think Roberto Martinez is better as an international coach than a club coach because of his style of play and the tactics he employs. Um, Vice versa, people want to see some managers like Guardiola and Mourinho at international level as coaches. I would argue that their coaching styles don't work at international level because they require a longer spell with your players and a more intense spell with your players over a long period of time. We have tried, you know, successful club coaches at international level, and it hasn't worked, and vice versa. Successful international coaches at club level don't always work. It's the same with some players. Some players play better for club over country, and vice versa. You'll get some great form out of a player for his club side. He plays for his country, and it doesn't work. Partly is that the system, is that the intense level of training and combinations with his teammates, different styles. I did see the try for Arundel against Toulon. Very, very good. Very, very good. It's not the best try I've seen over the last week. There's been some stuff coming out of South Africa that makes me go, "Wow, these kids are talented." But I did see the solo try. The defence just they don't commit to a tackle. They're backing off. They're backing off. And he's allowed to run a fair distance with the ball without being touched. So you deserve to concede if you're not willing to tackle the opposing player or attempt a tap tackle or attempt a tackle. When you allow an opposition player, ball in hand, to run that distance, you deserve to concede points. When your defensive kick chase line is disjointed, you deserve to concede points. Um, and when you give so much space on your outside, you deserve to concede points. There were some South African ones that were coming out of their high school system as well that were quite salivating to watch. Who's going down then? I got Leeds, Burnley, or Everton. I don't know. Is the simple answer. Leeds have run out of fit players. Burnley um, uh, have had a very slow start and they're paying for it. They never really got going this season. They have been playing catch up, and Everton have just been absolutely appalling. Um, I fear for Everton more long term um, because if they do survive this season, I don't know whether they can just spend their way out of trouble. I'm not sure the structures they have in place are gonna. Uh, they need a miracle to turn around their fortunes on a more long term basis. Um, Leeds' goal difference is terrible. That's because of the Bielsa style of play they were playing was far too open. They're paying for their openness in defence. Everton are paying for their poor away record, and Burnley are paying for their very, very slow start to the season. So all three clubs have had different reasons why they're scrapping to avoid relegation. Leeds have run out of fit players. Burnley didn't play well in the first three quarters of the season, and Everton's away record has been absolutely abysmal. Um, all three clubs have sacked the manager this season. Everton technically are on their third manager in 12 months. The manager they had this time last year was not the manager they started the season with. So they're on their third manager. Um, and yes, it could come down to the Leeds goal difference. I actually think Everton may not win another game this season. Everton can beat sides in the top six, top seven, but can't beat the sides around them. Burnley, have they left themselves too much catch up to do, and then Leeds, they've run out of fit players. Leeds have been decimated by injury this season, and yes, I think these three clubs are so grateful that Watford and Norwich were absolutely appalling. In another season, all three of them get relegated. And I'm not joking. If you look at previous seasons, 40 points has kept you up. And in another season, all three of them have got relegated by this point because the gap between them and the rest of the league is there, um, and is noticeable. The quality gap between themselves and the rest of the division. And in another season, they would be the bottom three and they would get relegated. But whoever goes down deserves to go down. Long term, I do have concerns about Everton. Long term, um, I and I don't know Lampard. I don't know if Lampard's going to be there this time next season. Um, that's going to be a watch this space. What happens to Frank Lampard? In Burnley's case, who is going to be the next permanent manager? And in Leeds' case, can they just get enough fit and available players to play a game? Um, the goal difference for Leeds though could honestly do them. But that was because the style of play they were playing under Bielsa was not defence orientated. Very attractive to watch as a neutral, but defensively was shoddy. Um, Watford have been on four managers this season. They've already named their replacement for Roy Hodgson. Uh, you couldn't make up Watford's situation. If Burnley stay up, do you think they'll be better next season? Um, well, look, it's their first season without Sean Dyche in over a decade. Whoever they appoint as manager is going to be very, very interesting who they get in, whether they stay with their interim or they go with a permanent outside successor. That'll be interesting. If they stay up, they stay up. If they go down, they go down. But if they go down, they're in serious financial difficulty with the ownership leverage takeover that's in place there, which is very similar to Man United. I've seen people in the media saying if they stay up, they could kick on and finish mid-table next season. What a load of nonsense. They're in trouble. They are in serious trouble. Everton are in not a good place. I don't know what to say to these people who say they're a mid-table team. Shows like a Ancelotti. I think I don't think they would have been much better even with Ancelotti in charge. There's a lot of problems at Everton that are deep and long lying, and quite well entrenched. There's a lot of structural issues at Goodison. I'm going to do this here so I can recover my back. I hurt my back at work today. Quite painfully, actually. Let me just. There we go. Everton have a lot of problems. There's a lot of issues. A lot of issues at Goodison, and they're deep rooted, and they've been there. Those issues have been in place for a very, very long time. A lot of questions have to be asked of Bill Kenwright. A lot of questions have to be asked over a lot of decisions the club has taken for a long period of time. And if Everton go down, they've had it. They're in serious trouble. Same with Burnley. Leeds, I think, can survive the drop. But Burnley and Everton have been, especially Everton, have been Premier League stalwarts for so long that the prospect of relegation isn't worth thinking about on an economics standpoint, especially with the debts that both Everton and Burnley have. They're not. They're just not sustainable. Quite frankly, they would be in um, serious trouble. Very serious trouble. Um, it will be interesting to see, as I say, if Frank Lampard is there this time next year. That'll be what will be interesting is if Frank Lampard survives the off season. But it's not his fault that the club are in the situation that they are in. Everton have been mismanaged for quite some time. A lot of managerial chopping and changing since David Moyes went to Manchester United. A lot of managers in the last 9 years. There's been a lot of chopping and changing at Goodison Park. A lot of managerial sackings. One of the least stable clubs in the Premier League. And then you compare that to the same time frame with some of the other clubs with more managerial stability. It's a no-brainer to why Everton are in the situation they're in. But no, I can't see them being better than what they are this season. A lot has to change, and I can't see it changing drastically in a positive manner very, very quickly. Um, but we'll have to wait and see with Everton. Um, I don't follow the media BS they come out with half the time. Half of the media stuff is just gas and wind and isn't truly reflective of the situation. Um, but out of those three clubs, I think Leeds are the least financially vulnerable of the three. Burnley are exceptionally financially vulnerable, but Everton and Burnley are in a bad state if they go down. Best way to look at it. Um, but the biggest story would be if Everton were to get relegated, would be the biggest story to come out of this season. Everton goes out, the internet will go into meltdown. And if they do survive this season, I'm not sure they'll survive next season. I think the rot has set in at Goodison. Um, there's not a lot of positivity around the club. They there's a lot of issues surrounding uh, surrounding the club. There's a lot of questions in regards to recruitment through to investment decisions, transfer policy. The Warriors had an atrocious weekend in the NRL. That was a shocking thought. Oh look, they were 13-11 and couldn't score. Admittedly, Cronulla should have been finished the game with 11 players. There's the Jesse Ramian shoulder charge to the head is more of a send off than Will Kennedy's high tackle, in my opinion. But the Warriors, I mean, I don't know what to say to that performance. I really don't. But then I don't know what to say in regards to their 70 points to 10 defeat that they had against the Melbourne Storm. Um, they've The Warriors promise much but deliver little. Um, you were when you are 13 or 11 and you cannot score any points, and you concede points in the manner that they did, and for most of the game it was 12-13. Um, that tells you all you need to know about the state of the team, quite frankly. Um, that sums up where the team is at. Um, it sums up the situation the team find themselves in. But no, that performance was absolutely atrocious. I don't know what else to say to that. Sometimes it can be difficult to overcome a team that's had a player sent off, but when you've got a two-man advantage, overlap should naturally occur. The defensive line should naturally be at stretching point anyway. Uh, you would think that they would be short of a centre or a back row forward, definitely a fullback, and so therefore the chip and chase is on, the overlap is on, um, and there was no. There's a lot of questions being asked of the coaching setup and of the players. But this is the Warriors have underwhelmed for quite some time, um, in my opinion. Uh, they've had some brilliant individuals play for them over many years. I think we can all agree on that. We can all agree that they've unearthed some great young talent over many years. I mean, Reece Walsh is a great piece of talent that they've unearthed in the last 2 years. The Broncos gave up on him and they picked him up on a very cheap contract. And he is a very good, talented young player. Harris Tavita, another one. Nickel Clockstadt was another. They obviously lost his services. He's moved on, but over many years, they've unearthed some really talented players. The problem is that I don't know. I mean, the situation with the Warriors, the performance is not just a one off. There's been several worrying performances with the Warriors over a number of years. Yes, you could argue the COVID situation, not playing at Mount Smart Stadium for such a long period of time. The fact that the only team from New Zealand, although there are hints being dropped by the NRL that the 18th team, when it does come along in a couple of years' time, will be a second New Zealand team, which may actually benefit the Warriors. But no, that is not a one-off performance from the Warriors. I mean, they're on their third coach in 2 years. Because of the uncertainty surrounding the team where they're going to be playing, they lost out on Todd Payton. He's now at the North Queensland Cowboys. It's going to be interesting to see how they respond to the Cronulla defeat. Cronulla are a good side. They are a good side. They're a top four, top six side. The Warriors are not. But some of the performances last season, some of the performances in 2020, there's definitely a lot of issues with the team, and that wasn't an isolated performance. The game against the Melbourne Storm, for example, where they conceded 70 points, tells you that the performance against the Sharks was not isolated. Um, there were some performances in 2020 and some performances last year as well, um, that hint towards deeper structural issues with the playing setup, with the squad that they have. Um, and individually, they have got some really good players. There is no doubt on some of the individual talent that they have available to them. No doubt on it. There are question marks about fitness. There's question marks about definitely about their defence. Some of the tries they conceded have been really soft, like really soft. Um, there's been a lot of question marks about their mental application. They've tuned out. They've given up on plays that even the Bulldogs wouldn't give up on. Um, yeah, you could argue that it is frustrating from a neutral perspective for a variety of reasons. The mental fortitude side of things, they when things do start to go wrong, they do tune out. They do mentally surrender. The game against the Melbourne Storm, for example, they completely just down tools. There was a couple of games last year where they just completely downed tools and just decided to stop competing in the contact area, in the tackle area. Um, there were some games in 2020 where they were just, well, there was one game in 2020 where they had 100% completion until like the 85th minute, where they completed. I think they actually had 100% completion rate in a game, and they completed 46 out of 46 sets consecutively in a game and had a completion rate of like 92%. Scored only 16 points. They've allowed Cody Nikorima to depart mid-season. Harris Tavita is out injured at the moment, so they've already got issues with their halves and depth there. They've got Roger Tuivasa-Sheck going to rugby union when he did. I think okay, that's his personal decision. There is a salary cap in the NRL, and his decision to take up the offer from the New Zealand Rugby Union, they can't match that financially. The fact he took up the offer early as well is a problem. Saying that, if they knew he was going to make that decision, because there would have been discussions surrounding RTS's departure, then the lack of planning and foresight in regards to that decision lies with the Warriors' management and coaching setup. But some of the well, some of their game management has been poor. A lot of poor mistakes. But the fact of the matter is, they should have, Cronulla should have finished the game with 11 players. How do I think the Dolphins will do in 2023? They seem to have signed some good players and are linked to many more. It's going to be an interesting test of Wayne Bennett's coaching ability, because he's not inheriting a solid side where he can take it, just improve, a team. He's partly building a team. He's basically building a team from scratch, really. Um, they've got some. They haven't got an outstanding marquee player. Every major marquee player they've been linked with has turned them down. Cameron Munster is going to be the key. If they can get hold of Cameron Munster, the situation does change significantly. It really does, and we will see. There's a big fight from the Melbourne Storm to keep him um, down in Melbourne. There's they are linked to a lot of players. They've been turned down by a lot of players. Caleb Ponga, Reece Walsh, and there have been others have turned them down. Now, it will be interesting to see what their initial 2023 Elite 30 man squad looks like. Yes, Fafita at the Gold Coast Titans has been linked with a move further north in Queensland. Yes, he's on a lot of money. You have to remember there is a salary cap. He's a back row forward. They need a halves combination. Now, Kieran Foran going to the Gold Coast Titans from next season for not a lot of money, right? He's only going for a couple 100,000. But you've got Kieran Foran going to the Titans, which is key. Fafita is already signed, but he's on a lot of money. There is a salary cap in place, which is going to be interesting because sides have to stay compliant. There are other players coming off contract at the end of the season. Plus, you've got a World Cup where players can play themselves for a shop window, for example. Players who are playing Queensland and New South Wales Cup, reserve grade, will play for countries like Jamaica and Greece and Lebanon, and therefore put themselves in that window of exposure. Now, the Dolphins haven't played a competitive first grade game yet. It's going to be interesting to see what their first major market player is. They may look at the Super League for talent. Bear in mind, Wayne Bennett has coached the England side and the Great Britain side. He may decide to look at Super League for a handful of players to add to that squad. He's going to think outside the box when filling his 30-man elite roster. Um, uh, um, in regards to what the Dolphins' final squad will look like and how competitive they'll be next season, anything can happen. Quite frankly, between now and February next year, we have got a World Cup um, to be played, where there will be players, both Super League systems and NRL systems, that will be putting themselves in the shop window to get signed. It's a difficult one. The Dolphins have been turned down by some big name players though. But Wayne Bennett and his recruitment team they may have already signed players, but they can't announce them because of contractual reasons. A player may have already signed who is that marquee player, but they've got to fill out the whole squad. There's only so many reserve graders they can promote to the senior squad. Um, they've got to be salary cap compliant. They've got to meet cap floor as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they look at the Super League and the Rugby League Championship over here for players and talent to fill the roster. And that's partly to do with Wayne Bennett being the former England and Great Britain coach. I wouldn't be surprised if he does look at the Super League um, for players. But it's going to be an ongoing story with the Dolphins until they have fully filled their roster, got all their contracts signed, and until they play their first game. You know, there's going to be this argument about what their first match day roster is going to look like. What you know when they do the trials matches, what players they're going to play until all their players are signed. That they until their squad is assembled. Um, it's there's going to always be speculation about who's the next player they're going to attempt to sign or sign. Um, you know how much depth is the squad going to have? Always. But whilst Wayne Bennett is still going to be coaching that team going forward, um, do not underestimate. Do not underestimate. Um, so there is that. There is that. But it's an interesting topic. You know, the Dolphins. How well do I think they'll do? Uh, uh, I could not tell you until, as I say, um, until they've played a competitive game and until they've actually got a squad fully completed and together. Um, that is a vague question with a vague answer because you don't know how the players they've signed are going to gel. Um, you know who's going to be the starting halfback, who's going to be starting fullback, hooker, starting lock, wingers. Until players are signed and until players are playing together and training together, doing a pre-season together. Um, that's a question that doesn't have an answer. I think that they'll do quite well. I think they'll be a solid team out the gate. Um, maybe not outstanding, but definitely a solid um, a solid outfit. Um, but we shall see. Um, it's a wait and see attitude. Um, it's a wait and see mentality with Dolphins. The best way I can describe the situation there. Um, it's like the debate about the Seattle Kraken this year in the NHL and how well they were going to do. They weren't the worst team. They didn't make the playoffs. Um, the when we have a promotion relegation system, for example, and a new team gets promoted, the debate is will they get relegated in their first season? Brentford would say no. Um, Brentford have had a very solid first Premier League season. Um, but in another season, they get relegated. So until matches are played and players have a bit of game time together, we can be sat here debating um, how well the Dolphins do and how what team they put together for another 6 months until all the contracts are signed. So for the next 6, 7 months, there's no point in speculating because they haven't fully named a squad yet. And yes, David Fafita has had discussions with Wayne Bennett, and clearly he's not having his best season that he could be having. There's no doubt that he is underperforming. Um, Unfortunately, they need to um, uh, uh, yeah, it is what it is. My residence, there's a guy who set up a residence group, the block of flats that I live in, and he's having a whinge and it's just setting my phone off constantly. No, but in regards to the Warriors situation, yeah, they were very poor. And some of their players have been linked with a move to the Dolphins. Um, Several teams have been pulled this season. The West Tigers, apart from those 2 wins, I'm surprised Michael Maguire still has a job. Um, his contract's up at the end of the year anyway. Um, the Bulldogs, I'm surprised Trent Barrett still has a job. Do the Maple Leafs finally close it out? um, do the Maple Leafs finally close out? Difficult one. They've had the Toronto Maple Leafs have a great regular season record, and they've scored a lot of goals this season. But I just don't think the team is balanced. I still think the team is too top heavy. Um, the balance of the side isn't right, and whether they get out the first round or not is irrelevant. Um, with the amount of money they're paying a handful of players, um, the the team is not built to win playoffs. But I know I could be wrong. They win the they win a round, that adds to momentum. But I would argue that they've also got to get past the Hurricanes, the Panthers, the Capitals, the Penguins. They've got to overcome some pretty gnarly teams. Whoever wins those series and then get through a conference final before even making the Stanley Cup final. Um, they've got a very difficult conference to get out of, and they haven't won a round since the early 2000s, and they've not won a round with this core of players. But they haven't won a game 7 for a very long time. So they it's a difficult one. Like it's I just don't think the team is balanced enough. And while they've had a great regular season, Ashley Matthews has had this amazing season, and the team itself has put some really insane numbers. Really insane numbers. They really have. They need to do that in the playoffs, and whether they we'll see if they can get past Tampa. Like that gives them an opportunity, but then you've got to look at the rest of the conference, and they've got to make it to a conference final yet um, before they can even like be in the discussion for a potential Stanley Cup. And that's another minimum 12 games before they can even get their hands on the trophy. Minimum. And that's if they swept three more series after this one. That's a minimum 12 extra games on top of what they would have played in this series before they can start touching silverware. I don't know if they have the balance in the team right for that. So we shall wait and see. Quite frankly, we shall wait and see. Um, I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm not saying that they're not equipped to do it, but I'm not 100% sold on the balance of their team being with enough depth and enough determination and grit to get over that line. Um, every team that has won the Stanley Cup has always had that gnarly, gritty, physical presence throughout their lineup. All three deep defensive pairings and all four lines, and I don't see the Maple Leafs having that. I don't see Wayne Simmons being the guy to lead the physicality for this team. Um, I just don't see enough nastiness, is a good way of putting it, enough hate in that team. A lot of skill, um, a lot of beautiful goal scoring play, but when you have to get down and dirty and rough and ready, I just don't see them having that sandpaper approach that you need at times to get over the line. But we'll see what happens. It's still the first round. Until they're through the first round, it it's irrelevant um, to think, really. So Pittsburgh leads the Rangers 3-1. Panthers Capitals is 2-2. Let's have a look. So here we go. Let's have a look. Okay. Toronto leads the series 3-2. So when's their next game? The next game is Friday. They have an opportunity on Friday to win the series 4-2. But looking at some of the other, I mean, the some of the other um, series, I mean, the Predators have already been swept. The Colorado Avalanche are dangerous in the West. The Penguins are in a solid position over the Rangers. Um, the Let's have a look. So the Penguins are in prime pole position against the Rangers. The Panthers Capitals is 2-2. That's no surprise there. That's a ding dong series. The Flame Stars is 2-2. The Canes are beating the Bruins 3-2. They have a chance to finish that, as well on Friday. Um, uh, the Blues Wild is 3-2. They've got a chance on Friday to lead the Kings Oilers. The Kings are beating the Oilers. So another, McDavid hasn't won a Stanley Cup yet, and the Oilers are on the. The Oilers got swept last year in the first round. They might not make it out the first round again, and then there's that debate. But yes, they're winning the series, but Leafs fans have been here before. They've had opportunities in the past to win game sixes and game sevens, and they haven't. So until um, until they win that game six or that game seven, the debate's going to be there with the Maple Leafs in regards to their mental application to pressure situations. And as I say, as I've always said, it's always well and good having a real skillful team that you can put together. But you need mental fortitude and grit and sandpaper to win. And I don't think the Maple Leafs have that. But they're ahead in the series, but they're going against back-to-back Stanley Cup champions who are going for three in a row. The Maple Leafs haven't got out the first round since the early 2000s, so there's your answer to that one. But yeah, I've been reading all the match reports and I've been looking at some of the highlight reels and some and you get an idea of how things are going. But when they're in this position, if they can win the series 4-2, okay, they've answered some of the critics. But let's say it gets tied at 3-3. Then the questions start getting asked. Another game seven, will they make it? If they lose the next two, they're out. So until they win that first series, the questions are not going to go away. And the Oilers are in the same position. They're behind 3-2 in their series, and they got swept last year. So again, questions are being asked of again the mental application. Great regular season teams can't make it in the playoffs. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all your questions. We'll have some more videos for you very, very soon. Thank you very much for all your questions. Good night for now. Shit.